I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you're listening to The Kathryn Zox Show. And joining me this morning is Michael Gilding, author of Fear in the Therapy Room. For millions of therapists and millions of people in therapy, the experience is familiar: shortness of breath, a racing heart, and sweaty palms. When we perceive a threat, our bodies naturally activate fight or flight response, both physically and behaviorally. This protective fear system is simply the nervous system doing what it is designed to do. When a client's fear system goes into overdrive, the therapist responds, resonating with what is happening in the room, much like strings on an instrument. The question is not how to prevent this response, but how to use it. So Michael Gilding shows how understanding, rather than suppressing, our own fear responses can make us better healers. Clear jargon, free and grounded in clinical experience, his book is written for therapists, but does speak to anyone who cares for others or wants to live with less fear and greater freedom. And he has been a counselor and psychotherapist for over 30 years. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you for having me.
Okay, so the book has been described as for therapists, but we're saying it's not just for therapists, it's for all of us who have been in therapy or intend to go into therapy, right?
That's right. I mean, I wanted for a few years to write for the general public. It's like that there's a lot of just really useful stuff that we know as therapists and come across as therapists that would be great if it was more widely understood. But sometimes the language of therapy, the jargon we use actually gets in the way. So my aim was to do a book for the general public, but then I was advised by my publisher that if I started with a book for therapists, because I'd already written papers and stuff like that, that would be a way of opening up to the book to the general public. But I hate jargon. So I actually wrote the book just so that anyone could understand it.
Okay, so now help us to understand it. So we're in the therapy room. Okay, there's two. I've been in therapy. And you have the therapist and you're sitting there. And is this part, or is this a premise? Like, I'm terrified or I'm fearful, first time in therapy. But my fear also gets transmitted to the therapist as well and kind of triggers fear in the therapist. Is that what we're talking about?
Absolutely. We're sort of two organisms. And I mean, you used in the introduction something that I use in the book, that it's a bit like two stringed instruments, that when one sounds, the other resonates. And actually, part of what makes us useful as therapists is the fact that we're picking up from the person that we're working with, the state that we're in. The thing that intrigued me when I started sort of properly understanding fear and how it worked and how it affected me as a therapist, and I was surprised how much it did. And then I do workshops for other therapists, and I found out that everyone actually comes across fear in the room because we are affected by the clients we work with. But that a lot of therapists thought there was something wrong with them, that they were inadequate in some way, that they were having these feelings. So some of the book is about this is normal. This is the way, and even outside of the therapy room, if you are with someone who is in an anxious state, it's going to put you in an anxious state.
And I can understand that probably better or more clearly than, let's say, when I am in therapy, because I think one of the things is when you come into a therapeutic situation, you kind of look at your therapist as, all-knowing, somebody, I don't want to use the word authoritarian, but they should be comfortable with all my fears and anxieties.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I mean, that reminds me of the very first client that I saw. He came down and sat in front of me, and I was in quite a state of anxiety. And what was going on in my head was, you think I know what I'm doing. And if you had an idea, you were my very first client, you'd probably run for it.
Okay, tell us about the first client, because you've been a therapist, I said, is in the intro, for over 30 years. What did you do? Are you saying also that once you understood it and you got good at it, you knew how to use that fear in a positive way? I assume you weren't using it so positively in that first session with your first client.
Well, I didn't have an understanding, a concept of fear system. Yeah, I was many years on that I was introduced to it. But I mean, the first set, I don't remember any of the details of the first session, what we talked about or anything like that. But I do remember the picture of the young man sitting down opposite me and this thought going through my head. But the other really strange thing was that with having this anxiety, gosh, this is the first time. Then as it went on, we got to the end of the session, I thought, that went far better than I thought. It was almost like I knew what to do. And it took me a bit to work out that actually I'd been in therapy myself for a time. And it's almost like that had been an apprenticeship. I'd learned far more than I thought I had learned from actually being in therapy. So actually that first session wasn't as terrifying as I thought it might be.
Do you think, Michael, that there are clients or patients that one has as a therapist that perhaps trigger too much of the therapist's stuff or fear, and maybe they shouldn't be seeing this particular client?
Absolutely. I think, well, it's almost like if you think of the whole of human experience as just a sort of tract of territory, each of us knows a particular tract of territory. We have particular experiences, we have our own traumas, and when we actually go into therapy ourselves and really get to understand the way we work and get to look at our blind spots and that, then actually we become helpful as a guide to someone else in that bit of territory. But there could be another bit of territory way out of our experience. And in a sense, we're nowhere near that. And I think, clients whose own experience of life was just way, way different from mine, if they came to see me, I would recommend they find a therapist and help them to find a therapist whose own experience was closer to their own.
Do you think many therapists do that in your experience? I mean, I'm sure you've trained other therapists, obviously, and you're involved with a lot of other health professionals, but do you think that happens generally? Yeah.
I think some do, but I think perhaps not as many do as should. I mean, I noticed on sort of directories of counseling where there's tick boxes for all the areas that people work in. People that haven't been working very long, ticking some fairly severe conditions. And I think, are you going to be causing trouble for yourself and your clients?
Let's talk about how you use the fear specifically to be helpful to right. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So that it becomes a positive experience.
Yeah. Well, there's several levels of fear, you see. I mean, I break down the fear system into three areas. One is fear alert, where the danger isn't really clear. It's the sort of thing where danger is at a distance and you're trying to work out what it is. And your body goes into a sort of wariness, and quite a few biological changes happen that mean that you're ready to leap into a fear response. But actually, you can calm yourself quite quickly. And from a therapist's point of view, that's really important to note, because just about all the stuff that clients bring in, it's difficult stuff, it's fearful stuff, it tips them further into fear and it can trigger us. But if we're noticing it and then regulating it, just sort of calming down a bit, it's just noticing the tension, and sometimes just a big sigh will break the tension. Or when we're in that state, if we just move our body a bit, it breaks the tension, and that sort of takes us out of fear. if we leave it too late and someone goes into a full fight flight response, loads of things happen. The way that the heartbeat changes, the volume of blood changes, hormones coursing through the body changes. It can take up to an hour sometimes for that to calm down, so you might lose your whole therapy session if someone gets into a state. Whereas if you're just aware of the activation of the fear system throughout the therapy, and you're just catching it in yourself, calming yourself, then you're having a calming effect on your client. And then sometimes I would be working, just noticing it in the client and helping the client just to calm, to breathe. Or we do things like if someone's talking about something very difficult from the past, and they're very easily triggered into fear, I might just recommend that they just tap their knees just side by side rhythmically, and I do it with them, so they don't think they look a fool. And we just do this sort of tap together, which just sort of calms and regulates it.
So regulating the fear, calming down, as you say, for the client and the therapist themselves. So it's really important that if one is going to be a counselor, a therapist, to really be in touch with all of those emotions that trigger you before you actually get into the field.
I think so. I mean, I think that's why one's own therapy is just really, really important for counselors, because this isn't an intellectual business. It's not just a load of theories. It's actually about being with someone and being affected by someone, and therefore you have to regulate yourself. I mean, the basic idea is that someone seeking care needs a relatively fear-free caregiver. I say relatively because none of us actually make it perfectly. But as a therapist, we really have to try to notice when we go into fear and calm ourselves. And then we're in a place to help our client.
And as a therapist, having been in as a therapist for 30 years, how did you get into the field yourself? I mean, what was the motivating, I guess, what are the motivating circumstances for you to decide, hey, I want to be a therapist?
Right. Well, it goes way back to when I was at university and I read Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. I was absolutely fascinated by it. But it's, I don't know, it didn't seem something that I could do there at that time. So I pursued a career. I was in Royal Mail in senior management for quite a few years, and run close to burnout on a couple of occasions, because it was quite a fear-driven organization. And I remember thinking in my sort of late 30s, I'm not going to last till 60 doing this. I need another string to my bow. And I was just thinking, what do I want to do rather than what do I have to do? I mean, at the time, I had 5 kids and a mortgage, so I had to earn money. So I was thinking, what do I want to do? And I thought back to Carl Jung, Memories, Dreams, and Reflections, and just the world of the unconscious, and just trying to unravel what went on. And I thought, I'd like to look into that. So that started me on the journey, and I started with a psychodynamic training. But then after a few years of that, I just got very curious. I came across EMDR and I thought, I want to learn that. So I trained.
Just explain what EMDR is in case they're on list. They might not know what that is.
Yes, it's eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a way of working with trauma that uses either eye movements or a sort of bilateral stimulation, one part of the body and the other part, the tapping thing on the knees that I was saying, that's sort of another way of doing it. and no one knows exactly how it works, but there is an element of this sort of calming and regulation in it, and perhaps even distraction, which stops us going into fear, but actually just keeps us processing and trying to work out what we, making sense of things that have happened to us in the past.
Calming, relaxing, deregulations. The deregulation, those are the key words, right?
That's right. And sometimes it's not all just calming down, because one other key thing, I mean, I've talked about the sort of fear alert stage, the early stage, and then there's the fear arousal fight flight that everyone knows about. But there's also what I call fear collapse. And that's when the parasympathetic nervous system completely shuts us down. And that's when there's a really major threat, when we're terrified and we feel trapped. And when clients go into that state, in the therapy room, if they're talking about something from the past that has triggered that, then they will very often go into a collapse. And as a therapist, I found that what I notice, it shuts the therapist down in the same way. There's the same resonance. So I would notice that my eyelids had just gone really heavy. When you're driving at night and you're overtired and you think, oh God, I've got to keep my eyes open or I'm going to crash. That sort of feeling. And when you notice that, what you need is to upregulate. You need to enliven the body instead of calming down. And there's different ways of breathing, different patterns of breathing you can use, some of which calm the body down, and some of which waken it up. And sometimes I would just use movement. If the two of us were getting really sluggish and I was thinking, oh, something's been touched on there, I would sort of stand up and invite the client to stand up and just move a bit.
Michael, what about we've been talking about individual therapy? How does this work, or does it work, let's say, in marriage counseling when you have two clients, or even family therapy?
Well, I don't work with couples or in family therapy. I do work with groups. And it works very much the same way in groups. I mean, I was introduced to this through my clinical supervisor, Una McCluskey, who I think is known in America. But in groups, she has a very good way of working, of just tracking the fear thing. And when someone comes in with a story, she would actually come in quite quickly with tension down, everyone. She's noticing everyone going into a bit of tension when they hear something a bit scary, or just keep breathing. And she's bringing this in constantly, and I trained with her in facilitating groups. And this is just such what it does actually is, because you're aware of the fear system all the time, you're jumping in, you're noticing it, you're helping the people in the group notice it. It actually makes the group so much safer. The fear is not hidden. The fear is not something that one person thinks they've got and all the rest of the group are okay. We're all in this together.
So you're not suppressing the fear. It's got to
it's you're
out
noticing
there.
it. Exactly.
You're noticing it.
You're noticing it. You're not being ashamed of it. You're not thinking there's something wrong with you. This is just the way we're wired up as humans. And anything difficult from the past, or anything just different and new, sort of puts us on edge and puts us into fear.
What kind of groups, or does it matter, does it work well with? Or let's say, and do the group, say in group therapy, are they there for either they have an addiction problem, gambling, drugs, alcohol? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, the groups that I'm used to, I mean, I've run this group on one occasion with members of the general public, but most of the time I've run it with therapists. So actually, you're running the group with therapists who have their own therapy, because I think this works best where people have actually done some work on their trauma. They've got some idea of their fear systems and the regulation of it. I certainly find that with severe trauma, just one-to-one is the safest actually for people. But there gets a stage where you've processed the trauma, but people get into there were where you start to emerge from trauma, you're into a different world. And sometimes the world you were in and the connections that you were in would keep you stuck in that trauma. So you're needing to find new connections, new meanings, new people, and the group work is amazing for that.
You have a group of therapists. That's terrifying.
It can be terrifying.
Yeah.
As you know, there's been research done which shows that therapists on the whole have had many more adverse and traumatic events in their lives than the general public as a whole. Which is why working with therapists who have had some of their own therapy is preferable.
And when did you start doing this with the therapist? Is this, because this is very unique. This is a very unique approach.
Well, this is a way of working that Una McCluskey developed over many years. She calls it exploratory. What is it?
Another name.
Goal-corrected psychotherapy, which is a real mouthful. But I trained with her for many years, and I mean, the work is based mostly in the UK, Ireland, although there's people from other countries joining. So it is relatively new. But I found it amazing for myself as a therapist. It really helped me to understand the fear system. It started me off exploring it more and more, it helped me personally, and it's been of real value to the therapists that have worked with me. I love the work. I love the responses to it, and people. It's almost like a release for people when they find that actually everyone has fear. That there's a moment in the work. I run workshops called Fear and the Therapist, introducing therapists to the fear system. And the bit I love best of it is we do the introductions and everything like that. And usually, so this will be sort of face to face, and no one knows each other. So it's a group of strangers, and automatically our fear systems are activated where it's a group of strangers.
Yeah, those are the others.
Exactly. And then I say, right, I'd like each of you in turn to talk a bit about what's brought you here. What you're hoping to get from this. And then I say, stop, close your eyes, notice what happened in your body when you were invited to speak in public. And then I say, open your eyes, and I go through a list of all the things that they might have noticed, like heart beating faster, or hot flush, or sweaty palms, legs going a bit wobbly. I go through this list, and as I go through it, you see these little grins on each person's face as you hit the one that they've been feeling, and then the whole group sees each other grinning, and it's almost like there's a sigh of relief. And it's like, oh my God, we're all the same. We're all human beings. We don't have to pretend. We don't have to pretend to be clever and know everything and be experienced therapists or anything. And actually, the group is a safe place from that point on.
So the resistance, I'm calling it resistance. I mean, do you ever have a therapist leave the session, or who can't, in the beginning, let's say, who can't or thinks they can't handle it, and then you bring them back into the group?
I haven't actually, and I think that's because we actually just start with this acknowledging the fear system and making the place safe. The problem with so many groups is, and I think this, the sort of initial Freudian or whatever psychoanalytic approach, where you have a group of people sit down and there's silence, actually what it elicits is anxiety. So that switches on the fear system. Now, the fear system does two things. It switches off our cognitive thinking, and it switches off our ability to be social. So it switches off therapy. Whereas this way of approaching it, you just acknowledge when you bring a group of strangers together, you have fear. Right, here's fear. We all share it. It's okay. Let's just regulate ourselves, acknowledge it. And then you start from a very different place and you get into deep work much faster.
Acknowledging the fear, acknowledging the fear system. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because our culture seems to sort of go against that. I'm thinking about we're sort of trained within our culture of social media that we're not afraid of anything. We can accomplish anything we want to. Everything is wonderful. You know, we're we're not allowed to do exactly what you've been talking about, expressing our fears and acknowledging it and then moving on.
Exactly. Just so much is fear based in the way that we run our societies. I mean, that's why we have such polarized politics. That's why we have wars in the world. That people cannot regulate the fear system.
So, do we need you to become engaged in politics? Because, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're at not in a good place, I think. And would this system work?
Well, that's something I'm very curious about. The more that I've done this work, the more that I think there's an awful lot in terms of working with trauma that actually can only happen outside of the therapy room. There's so much that keeps us in fear that's about our external environment. How safe are our relationships? How safe is our workplace? How safe is the neighborhood that we live in? And if there's real danger in these places, we might be able to calm people a bit in a short period that we're with them, but they're going back out into there, and they need the fear systems to survive. So I think we should be thinking more beyond the therapy room in a way. I mean, one thing that you get with trauma is chronic tension. You can do an awful lot with talking therapy, but if someone is chronically tense, then their body's not going to relax and their fear system isn't going to switch off. So I would encourage people to use massage, meditation, practice yoga, practices that actually calm the body, that change habitual patterns of the way we hold our body and that change habitual patterns of breathing, for instance.
We have 2 minutes left. So we want people to continue the conversation amongst themselves and read the book, Fear in the Therapy Room. And I've been talking to the author, Michael Gilding. So Michael, give us websites to go to or other platforms so we can get more information and maybe even about your training programs, I guess, for therapists.
Well, my own website is michaelgilding.com. Gilding spelt with a U, like building, except with a G. So michaelgilding.com. And that has links to training for therapists. And the other one would be Psychology Today. I'm blogging on Psychology Today. So if you go on there and put my name in, oh, yes. If you go on YouTube and put my name in, there you'll find 3 talks that I've given trying to explain all of this stuff to the general public for the York Festival of Ideas. And I think that those talks probably best summarize my own understanding so far.
Great. We will be looking for your blog and reading your book, Fear in the Therapy Room. Thank you, Michael, for being on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
We appreciate it. I appreciate it.
Cheers. Thanks, Kathryn. Bye-bye.
Bye. I'm Kathryn Zox, your social worker with a microphone, and you've been listening to The Kathryn Zox Show.